which means that the preferences of society between H and V, whether society choose H when V is available, don't only depend on the individual preferences over H and V, not on the presence of another alternative that is a bad one anyway, because it's not chosen. And that seems a rational thing to do. The second condition we want is that of non-dictatorship. Okay? So if there is one individual, if there is one individual whose choices are always equal to the choices of society, irrespective of what the other preferences are, then I have a dictator, and I don't want a dictator. Okay? Suppose we have two choices, A and B. What is A? Anyway, let's have G and S. Suppose my choices are G and S, and individual me, I prefer G to S, and everybody else in society prefers G to S, S to G. Now, it might be the case that society chooses G for whatever reason. But then let's change, suppose W and X are the choice. So everybody else prefers W, but I prefer X, and society chooses X. If that's true for every possible choice and for every possible preference, then I'm a dictator. Because society might as well just ask me, ignore everybody else. And we don't want dictatorships. The next three properties are Pareto criterion, unrestricted domain, and transitivity. Okay? Pareto criterion is simple. These are very simple. Pareto criterion means if everybody in society prefers A to B, then society should also prefer A to B, which is obvious in a sense, unanimity. Sometimes you find this called unanimity. If everybody agrees on a choice, then society should choose that, not the other one. Unrestricted domain. Well, we want people to be allowed to have any preference they want, however crazy. Okay? And because if they become a majority, then they will, in some sense, be able to dictate the agenda and so on. So we don't want to say only people that have certain preferences are allowed to express them. So everybody can express their preferences, however crazy they are. Okay? If you restrict preferences, as the only people who can vote are those with my preferences, then obviously, you get a dictatorship, essentially. Not one person, but a group, homogeneous group. So we don't, unrestricted domain means that we allow people, provided the preferences are transitive, that's the only condition we impose. And finally, transitivity, we want that society's choices, the collective preferences, to be transitive. Again, to avoid that the order in which choices are put matters. Often you find this is dropped, because this is not really a restriction, given the other four. But I think you find that in Gareth Miles' book, you like the word input that comes up, and this is easy to remember. Okay? So I want these 5 conditions. This holds into natural, and the theorem says that there is, if there are at least 3 options, then there is no collective decision-making process that satisfies all 5 conditions. And one must be violated. At least one must be violated. Okay? So that means that the way to go from individual preferences to collective choices will have some profound imperfection, because we will violate one of these things. And that, in a sense, is, we observe this in the extraordinary variety of electoral systems you have. Okay? I think I mentioned it, that endless debate, we must reform the constitution because the voting system is bad. We should do like the British, that have a very good electoral system, whereas in Britain they say, our electoral system is so bad, we should do like many European countries that have proportional representation, that's much better. So, it's just impossible, it's just theoretically impossible to have an electoral system that that satisfies a number of very basic properties. a lot of effort, a lot of intellectual effort has gone into relaxing these assumptions and see whether you can find. And essentially, the one you don't want to relax is the non-dictatorship. I mean, it's very easy to have, just have the same preference, just elect the dictator, and that's, then you certainly have preferences that satisfy the other properties. But you do want some genuine collective choice, so people must be able to have a difference of opinion and not debate. Yeah?
I'm sorry. I was wondering what Churchill says about democracy, which is quite fitting.
Churchill?
Yes.
Yeah.
Democracy is the worst form of government, apart from all the other
yes.
events that are.
And that I agree, but what Churchill didn't say was that we don't know what democracy means. Okay, so we do want a system that translates collective choices, individual preferences into collective choices. But what then Adler said after Churchill was, well, but there isn't a method that satisfies all those properties which we think are desirable. So we have to relax something, which means that we will be in situations where bizarre, in the voting, I mean, people spend a lot of time studying voting, and depending on time we might mention some of the interesting things. You get a lot of practical examples of paradoxes where the electoral system that seems a good idea throws up some very bad results. Okay, you may find, I'll give you an example now. It's in the slides, but isn't the part of the slides that I may drop. It's the Alabama paradox, and that's something that really happened in the United States when they recounted the number of senators to not the number of senators, the number of members. Each state has 2 senators, but the number of Congress, the lower chamber in the U.S. Is proportional to the population. Okay, so now every now and then, when the population changes, they recount the number of members that each state has. And at some point, because of the way the calculation is done, it so happened that Alabama had an increase in population relative to the other states. So the percentage of population living in Alabama increased, but because of what happened in all other states, the number of representatives went down. So although the population increased, because the way you need to round up, you can't have half a representative, you must have an integer number of representatives. So the population of Alabama increased, and they went from, I think, 17 to 16 members of Congress. But that's inevitable. That's what Arrow's theorem says. You can't have a way of allocating political power, decision making, which is independent. And the reason of the Alabama paradox is because in the way the proportion of seats is allocated, independence of the relevant alternative is violated. So a change in if the total proportion of Texas and California is the same, but their relative shares changes, then the number of seats in Alabama changes. That is well explained why we might mention, but it's in the slides now. Okay, so what we do know, so the way we want to go from individual choices, from individual preferences to collective decision making is just the ranking. So I'm asking you, which do you prefer, state A or state B? But there is more in the individual's preferences than just the ranking, because there might be strength of the preference. Okay? So there are people who really, really dislike gay marriage, and there are people who say, oh, I don't really care one way or the other. Okay? So I think they shouldn't, but I'm not really fussed about it. Okay? So we don't have a way to gauge the strength of preferences. Okay? And that's true in two ways. Either I say, well, I don't mind, I prefer to go to eat a pizza, but I don't really mind. We can go to have a drink. Okay? Some people are really hungry and they really want to go and have a pizza. Or we say, well, we really care about this person here. Their preference you should have more importance. Why? Well, because, you know, it's her birthday after all, so she can choose what she wants. Or she's a widow, a war veteran, and so on. So we may want to give different weight to the preferences of different individuals for two reasons, either because they feel very strongly about an alternative or two alternatives, or because they are more prominent individuals for one way or the other. So if we could use that information, then we could make choices which are much better informed. Okay, and that, yeah, people study that, people try to understand the consequences of that, but it's difficult. So, for example, there are a lot of issues that become prominent simply because people, simply because a small minority cares very strongly about that. Okay, so I think a lot of environmental issues, protection of endangered species. Okay, nobody cares. Very few. Nobody's wrong. Very few people care about the gray-crested spotted newt. But those people are very vocal, and they can hassle everything. Nobody else cares much about them. They say one way or the other. But it might be that the total cost incurred by society for protecting the grey-crested spotted newt exceeds the benefit that the people who care a lot about this newt benefit. So it's difficult to incorporate the strength of feeling into practical decision choices, and we can start voting, alternate voting methods, and so on. But the whole issue is whether utility is measurable. Okay, it's if we could have an objective measure of utility, so if we could have a number, so that is accepted as comparable, then we would know how to make choices. So, for example, if I wanted to maximize the total weight of a certain population, then I could assess two measures, and I can say, well, this is likely to increase the total weight of the population, because I can weigh everybody and say, okay, I know what we start from, and so if we give more to eat to people who have better metabolism, and they can, whatever. But the point is, we can't do that with utility, because we don't have a way of saying that one person has more utility than another. And the change in utility in one person is more than the change in utility for another. So
I have to stop and restart.
yeah, I think that's what, after the number of